it's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job.
Hi, this is Guy Wallace, and this is the Pursuing Performance Podcast. Welcome. L&D alignment is important. But alignment to who, and what, and how? Alignment is important for L&D so that they are on the same page with the leaders of their enterprise, as producing stellar L&D that doesn't align with the stakeholder needs is not really sufficient, not adequate. The enterprise leaders have strategic plans and operational concerns, and that should be part of your problem. Your goal is to address those. Your stellar L&D doesn't really count in their minds if you're not addressing the things that are on top of minds for them. You may be serving some parts of the enterprise very well, but it could be that there were bigger returns to be gained elsewhere, bigger fish to fry. The what in terms of L&D alignment or realignment is to the strategic needs and the operational concerns of the current state, and then tackling what the late Geary Rummler called the CBIs, the critical business issues. Because if you're not working on that, you may not be working on the lowest of the low-hanging fruit, but you may be working on something not quite high enough on the concerns hierarchy of your leaders. They may be attending to these in a secretive manner so that they're not widely shared and therefore not widely known, these critical business issues. These may be the things that will bring competitive advantage to the enterprise and therefore mum's the word. We keep quiet about these things, and if we are asked later to engage with them to help them address those needs, it might be rather late in the game. It's because we're not in that loop, so we're somewhat clueless, and we go about our business doing the best that we can given the direction, or lack of direction, that we have. So, how do we go about aligning with the needs of the enterprise in total, but mostly with the leadership of our enterprise? How do we serve everyone in a prioritized manner? And who makes those priority decisions? Well, it's the Board of Governors. You can also do this in an informal way if you simply mirror the formal structures that I'm going to share without the policies, procedures, processes, and practices all documented. I learned all of this from the late Ray Svensson, who was my business partner for 15 years, 1982 to 1997. I had met Ray when I was an employee at Motorola's Training Education Center back in 1981. Ray was doing some consulting there for the new director of that organization, and I was merely a lowly training project supervisor. Basically, I was out there doing needs analysis, performance-based needs analysis, with my clients, the manufacturing, materials, and purchasing functions all across North America. And I was helping them to determine what their needs were, and then I was hiring in vendors to attend to those needs that were under my supervision. Ray was helping MTech install what I call a governance and advisory systems. It's really got 3 layers again, not just the 2. So there's a governance layer or level, and there's an advisory layer or level, and then there's a project management layer or level, in my model anyway. At the top, the Board of Governors is comprised of the top 1 or 2 people in every strategic business unit and also at the corporate level. They got to say yes or no to the requests made by the next level down, the advisory system. The governance board met twice a year and had procedures in place even for dealing with emergency issues that might come up in between. I mean, who would be consulted? Who would get to decide? Do we tackle this, yes or no? What's our plan for addressing this, and what's it going to cost? Do we have the permission of the top of the organization to attend to this, to be in alignment with what they see as the topmost needs of the enterprise? The second level, the advisory system, was composed of multiple function areas of concern. At MTech, we were dealing with sales and marketing, and then engineering, and another on manufacturing, and the last one was on management. These could be expanded later, but these were the top 4 areas of concern for the people at the top of the organization, at the top of the enterprise. And so we needed to attend to these 4 areas as they were deemed important by the informal governance structure that existed before Ray and the new director put all of this into place. So the advisory system would look across the business units, the strategic business units, from a functional perspective and determine what were their common shareable needs and which were unique, and what were they worth to the business. What is the cost of nonconformance? In other words, what does it cost to do nothing at all and live with it? Once we understood the cost of nonconformance, we could compare to the cost to conform, to address it, to meet the needs. That's where you look at ROI or economic value add or do a cost-benefit analysis. And that's where MTech, the organization I belong to, came in. We helped determine what were the probable costs and schedules for addressing these issues. We took our best educated guess based on our experience in the learning and development business. Those recommended priorities of each function went before that board of governors twice a year, and yay or nay was decided at the very top. I mean, a request could come in to support something that the top leaders of the organization knew was going to go away in the not-too-distant future, a part of the secret strategic plan. And perhaps that thing was going to be displaced by new products or new technology or whatever, but investing in it today was something that would soon become a dead horse and wasn't a rising star or a cash cow. That was just not sound business. Once the projects were approved, MTech got involved in working with an assembled project steering team for each project. Now, where the other 2 levels of the governance and advisory system were more or less permanent, I mean, there were people who rotated into the seats in a predetermined schedule so that it was a fresh look and nobody was going to be involved in these systems forever. The project steering teams were assigned a project or a handful of related projects, and they would be in place for the duration of those projects, and then they would end. They would be sunsetted. We would engage those project steering teams at key milestones per a formal or informal project plan. Now, not every group believes in formal planning, and they dislike formal planning so much that sometimes we training project supervisors would have them in our back pockets, so to speak, so that if we were challenged, we could pull the plan out and share with everybody, this is when that's going to happen, or this is what needs to happen next, and then after that. It was kind of a sneaky, devilish way that we needed to do to predict our futures, to do CYA, to answer some of the tough questions to people who didn't like planning in the first place, when in fact they really wanted you to have a plan and be able to answer their questions. The project steering teams got to make the go or no-go decisions at the formal gate review meetings, and they were to shepherd or govern through a command and control structure, if you will. But that also empowered the suppliers on the learning and development side, MTech, me. We were empowered to get the job done on their behalf. The project steering teams reported to the functional advisory councils whose priority this project was, and sometimes those were multiple functions who had a shared need across them. Maybe sales and marketing needed something that manufacturing needed, which was the case of one of the projects I was involved in after this was all set up. I was bringing in a negotiations program from Huthwaite for purchasing agents who were under the jurisdiction of the Manufacturing Council. And it was also being put in place to help salespeople who were under the jurisdiction of the Marketing and Sales Council. People who, of course, were part of the sales and marketing group at the advisory levels wanted to know what was going on with a project that had been given to the Manufacturing Council. So there was a lot of communications that was required across the board. Now, you can set up one of these governance and advisory systems with the 3rd level, the project management or project steering team level, quite formally, and publish the names of, who's who, who's doing what, what's at what level, when are the meetings, where did they occur, what were the decisions they were looking at, what decisions did they make, etc., etc. Because those questions always came up. But you can put this in as well in an informal means. You can meet individually with the people at the top of the enterprise and their strategic business units and survey them to understand their needs. Then you can work across the functional groups, the heads of those kinds of organizations across the enterprise, and assess them for what are their top priority needs. If they could, what would they have us work on? And then we would take those back up the chain to the informal governance level and try to get buy-in on that now. That's all very inefficient, but it can be effective. But at the cost of this inefficiency of running back and forth of the various groups and not assembling them all together in one room or on one virtual meeting to hear the business cases and to make the decisions. The business cases being made to do certain projects and the why, and then have the decisions rendered so that we can get on with it post haste. The same thing happens at the project level when we have an informal project steering team member who may come out of the woodwork 3/4 of the way through the project and take exception to everything that's been done to that point. I mean, what the heck? Why weren't they involved since day one? And if they were appointed to these project steering teams at the third level by the people at the second level, well, then there was a lot less question about why or why not certain people were included. And once the organization stood that this was going to be the way things worked, people clamored for being involved in specific projects. Of course, this was due to the communications. What were you even thinking about doing, and what has been decided? Gee, I have some concerns about Project 7. Maybe I better get myself involved and engaged and go lobby my functional representative at the advisory level and get myself on board that third level because I want to have a say in what we address and how we address it, blah, blah, blah. One of the key secrets, I believe, for having a 3-level governance and advisory system, and including the project steering team level, is that you need to have a lot of communications and explain to the people at the top, the board of governors, what the governance system is all about, and then have them handpick the people on the advisory systems one level below, the functional council or process councils, or however you decide to organize that level. Now, if your goal is to share the things that can be shared and address the things that are unique, then organizing them by functional disciplines who own certain processes in the enterprise is the smart way to go, I do believe. It's all about the data that's produced, and the data needs to be accurate and complete and appropriate, but it also needs to be trusted. It needs to be believed. I had an experience back in 1981 when I was presenting to the Manufacturing Operations Council of Motorola, and I handed out binders to the 30-some people in the room, because those were the days of binders, of course. And the head person cracked open that binder, took a look at the title, the date, the author, who was me, and then the contributors that I had listed on the very front page. He scanned that list for just a couple of seconds. He closed the binder, threw it across the room, and said, "This is bullshit." It was because I had sought out volunteers to participate with me in my project, and the people that volunteered I later came to call the Friends of Training. They were always available to help the training organization. Their organization didn't care if they were off doing something else with the training organization because they were not missed, because they didn't have credibility back in their own home room, and so they volunteered to get away from that home room and go help the training organization. And so I learned that, therefore, if your sources don't have credibility with what you produce data-wise, I mean, it might be accurate, it might be complete, it might be appropriate, but it's simply not trusted. And after all, doesn't it have to be trusted? I think so. The late Ray Svensson wrote a book about all of this back in the early 90s, titled The Training and Development Strategic Plan Workbook. It's out of print now, but it provides guidelines for what he was doing way back then. Ray was a former Bell Labs engineer for AT&T, so he thought like an engineer. He got tired of being an engineer and became an engineering manager who was then sent to AT&T headquarters in New York to be part of a strategic planning team. One of the things that they saw in the late 70s was this move from analog systems to digital systems, which was quite a big deal. What was at risk was how well AT&T handled it in terms of developing the workforce who was going to be involved in the installation, the operations, and the maintenance of this new digital technology. So they sent Ray to Bell System Center for Technical Education in Lisle, Illinois, where he was in charge of the strategic planning for that unit. That unit trained 50,000 telephone company engineers and technicians across the entire Bell system. So in Chicagoland, where I was from, there was Illinois Bell, but there was also Indiana Bell, Michigan Bell, Wisconsin Bell, etc., etc. The Bell System Center for Technical Education served all of the Bell System operating companies across all of the United States. They were responsible for making sure that people were made ready and had developed the knowledge and skills necessary with all of telephony across America. The installation, operation, and maintenance of the existing system and plugging in the new pieces so that it was going to go from being analog only to analog and digital, eventually getting to mostly digital or totally digital. At least that was the part of the vision as I understood it way back then. In his role at the Bell System Center for Technical Education, Ray assembled functional advisory teams. They identified their top training needs based on an understanding of the strategic plan of the organization and the technology roadmap. The problems or opportunities right now versus the near term or long term in the strategic plan made their lists of requests in that regard. It was decided what was funded and what was resourced. It was monitored and managed from the top of the organization, and at the middle, those functional groups made their priorities known to the top of the organization, where it was decided what would be funded and resourced. Then it was monitored and managed from the top and the middle as projects were undertaken. They had such great success because they had a very rigorous but flexible instructional systems design methodology. Now, there were people who complained about it because it took, I forget whether it was 12 or 17 linear feet of binders on a bookshelf that guided step by step and micro-step by micro-step the processes for instructional systems design, and in the end, how they were going to measure their impact. At some point, they decided they no longer needed to do 100% measurement of every course that they produced because the data was telling them that they were producing quality with the process they had. So they no longer had to do quality control at the end and at midpoints of the project. I mean, they did keep the midpoint measurements in place, but they now had a quality assurance system. Their processes had proven themselves to produce stellar quality. So they then went to random sampling of measurement just to make sure. What was the impact of their courses? Was it still top-notch as it had been? The answer was yes. Most importantly, all of this was seen as meeting the top priority needs of their enterprise. The learning and development function needs to become business champions first and not just learning champions. And I think that's where everyone in L&D ought to be. They ought to strive to become business champions first and learning champions second. Hey, thanks for listening. Cheers.
It's about performance. Oh, it's about performance. Yes, it's about performance. It's about performance back on the job. It's about performance.